There is a secret formula of God, a conserving law hiding in plain sight, that turns delay into acceleration when the heart consents to divine order. This is not motivational varnish. It is the sober architecture by which scattered effort is gathered, sealed, and released as decisive motion. The thesis is exact. What you call delay is conserved potential. What you call acceleration is conserved potential released on schedule under the highest. That clarity lets us begin without superstition, because a law that is real does not need dramatics to work. This formula is not a metaphor for a gifted few. It is a living principle in every person willing to align with the source rather than perform for outcomes. God, as the living order, is the ground of this work, not a technique we manipulate, but a covenant we enter. Law is impartial. Allegiance is personal. When allegiance is given, the law becomes visible, not because it changed, but because we did. This keeps the tone honest. Reverence without credulity, practice without pride. The forgotten principle is conservation. Desire is energy. Meaning is the vessel. We leak time when meaning is vague, and we multiply time when meaning is sealed. The ancients encoded it with vessels, lamps, and altars. New Thought named it mental equivalent. Scripture hints with, "Let there be light." The image varies, the law does not. Recovering this buried key is less about novelty than fidelity, less about new steps than right measure in the steps we already know. What was forgotten is not exotic. It is simple enough to overlook and strong enough to outlast fashions. The mechanism is ordered. Prayer is the decisive word that consecrates desire and gives it form. No pleading, no bargaining. A clear instruction spoken under God. Subconscious receptivity receives this instruction and begins to build the inner equivalent, surrendering contrary pictures without strain. Then the silent oracle intuition informed by conscience delivers timely hunches that stitch outer steps to inner shape. When these three align, delay ceases to be waste. It becomes incubation. When they scatter, delay becomes erosion. This is why two people can wait the same length of time and reap opposite harvests. One conserved, the other leaked. Delay, then, is not the enemy. It is a thermometer of order. Under law, delay is gestation. Outside law, delay is drift. The formula does not remove time, it redeems time. It does not skip process, it purifies process. Acceleration is not a miracle of speed, but a miracle of losslessness. Less friction in thought, fewer contradictions in motive, fewer detours in action. The result can look sudden only because the sealing happened in quiet, like fruit that seems to ripen overnight after weeks of invisible chemistry. Emmet Fox, speaking from the New Thought tradition, framed the key with unusual clarity. Form the mental equivalent under prayerful alignment, and the outer will find a runway. We mention him once, not for name-dropping, but to honor the lineage that kept this key alive while noise swelled around it. Teachers pass, law remains. The goal here is not to collect phrases, but to keep covenant to practice until conservation turns into pace, and pace turns into peace. You will feel a curve as we proceed. Awe as the secret formula is defined. Steadiness as God is acknowledged as source. Recognition as the forgotten principle is uncovered. Relief and resolve as delay is reinterpreted. And quiet strength as acceleration begins to appear without strain. Expect precise language and clean lines. Expect warmth without sentimentality. The point is not to be stirred and then stalled. The point is to be ordered and therefore swift. We will now enter the working parts of the secret formula of God. First, the law in plain sight, so every subsequent step rests on firm ground. The secret formula of God is a law in plain sight, a conserving principle that gathers what we scatter and releases it as acceleration when we submit desire to divine order. And this is the ground on which the entire journey stands. We begin with awe rather than hype, because awe keeps the mind clear and the will honest, and clarity with honesty is the first seal against waste. The thesis is exact. Conservation under God turns delay into stored potential and stored potential into pace, which is why outcomes that once resisted us begin to move with a quiet inevitability. The point is not novelty but lawfulness, because lawfulness outlives moods and fashions. Secret here does not mean hidden to the elite. It means overlooked by the hurried, because hurry cannot see laws that reward patience with precision. The formula is secret, the way a compass is secret to one who never checks direction, and the moment we check direction, we discover order had been available all along. The law is impartial while our consent is personal, and this distinction protects us from superstition and from cynicism at once. The takeaway is simple. The secret formula is accessible the moment we consent to order. To define the law, we must define its losses, because every law reveals itself most starkly where it is violated. We leak through vague meaning, contradictory images, unexamined motives, and speech that denies what prayer declares, and these leaks stretch time into delay that feels like fate. Under law, meaning becomes a sealed vessel. Under leak, meaning is an open pan that evaporates what it tries to warm. The conclusion is firm. Acceleration is not mostly about speed, but about losslessness, and losslessness begins with meaning sealed. The law expresses itself through a recognizable mechanism that admits no gimmicks. Prayer gives decisive instruction to desire under allegiance to God. Subconscious receptivity receives this instruction and begins forming the mental equivalent without strain. The silent oracle conscience-informed intuition delivers timely hunches that bind outer steps to inner form. When this threefold rhythm is kept, time ripens. When it is broken, time frays. The takeaway is procedural. Keep instruction, receptivity, and intuition in covenant, and pace will gather itself. Emotionally, the secret formula first stirs wonder and then steadies courage, because it explains delay without humiliating the heart. Delay is not divine disfavor. It is often the bill for our leakage, and a bill is information, not condemnation. Under divine order, the bill becomes a syllabus, because what we pay teaches us how to conserve. The practical meaning is clear. Treat delay as a diagnostic of order, rather than a verdict on worth. Consider the image of a lamp trimmed and a door closed against draught. The flame does not burn faster. It burns truer, and true flame does more work with less smoke. Conservation is the closed door, and intention under God is the trimmed wick, and the room's illumination is acceleration without frenzy. Imagery must land in instruction, so we speak plainly. Close the door on contradiction. Trim the wick of vague desires, and you will see the same oil produce greater light. The takeaway is operational. Seal first, then shine. Some will ask, isn't acceleration just luck arriving? But luck is what law looks like to the unobservant, and what we call sudden is often the last inch of a long alignment. The orchard seems to burst in a week because winters and sap were not televised, and our inner winters and sap are no less real. Our task is to cooperate with the unseen seasons so that the visible week does not arrive empty. The conclusion is respectful. Suddenness is the outer punctuation of inner conservation. The formula rests on God as living order, which prevents us from turning practice into superstition or pride. The mind alone can concentrate. Only a consecrated mind can conserve, because conservation in this sense is moral as well as mental. Alignment purifies motive so that energy stops fighting itself, and purity is the most efficient engine on earth. The takeaway is theological and practical. Without allegiance to source, technique multiplies friction. With allegiance, technique multiplies fruit. A single scriptural echo verifies the architecture without dragging us into quotation games. Be still and know. Stillness is the conservation of motion's source, and knowledge is the form that stillness takes when it is loyal to truth. Stillness here is not inertia. It is the refusal to leak through panic, chatter, and resentment, and that refusal makes room for timing that no rush can buy. The point is disciplined calm, not passivity, because disciplined calm shortens paths that anxiety lengthens. The takeaway is behavioral. Cultivate stillness as a working condition, not a mood. Practically, we begin with 3 daily measures that honor law without theatricality. First, consecrating word. Each morning, speak a single, exact instruction under God for the day's chief aim, and let all lesser tasks align under it. Second, receptive hygiene. Several times a day, release contrary images by name and replace them with the mental equivalent, which is the inner architecture that can host what is sought. Third, oracle time. Brief scheduled stillness in which we listen for the next right step and write it as an actionable cue. The conclusion is implementable. Give the law handles in your calendar, and acceleration will have a channel. We also establish right measure, so zeal serves order rather than scorches it. Too little focus, and the vessel never seals. Too much strain, and the vessel cracks from heat, and both errors lengthen delay under different slogans. The salt metaphor holds, measure reveals flavor, excess ruins the dish, and spiritual practice is a cuisine, not a dare. The takeaway is caution with dignity. Intensity is not the hero, consistency under measure is the hero. Finally, we test the definition by its fruit. When the secret formula is kept, impatience fades, not because outcomes are slow, but because trust grows faster than fear, and fear is what makes any wait feel long. Acceleration begins as the felt absence of inner drag and matures into competent outer motion, and that sequence is a dependable sign that conservation is real. The closing line must open a doorway. We have named the law in plain sight, so that the next step, acknowledging God as the source of order, can rest on reverence without confusion. Picture a compass laid on a quiet table. The needle steadies only after the tremor stops, and in that hushed direction becomes undeniable. So it is when the mind yields to God as the living source of order, because allegiance, not cleverness, is what allows the needle to find true north. We are not adding a religious gloss to technique. We are locating technique inside covenant, where law becomes personal without becoming partial. The takeaway is sober. Speed worthy of trust starts where worship becomes orientation, not ornament. We must be exact about names. When we say God, we do not mean rumor, custom, or a mascot for our preferences. We mean the incorruptible order that underwrites reality and summons the heart to reverence. Under this order, time is meaningful, conscience is luminous, and outcomes are disciplined by measure rather than whim. Calling this source by name is not for theatrics. It is the boundary that keeps practice from devolving into self-hypnosis. The conclusion is necessary. Without the source, the formula shrinks to technique. With the source, technique becomes serviceable law. Emotionally, acknowledging God changes the weather inside the soul. Fear stops impersonating wisdom because fear cannot kneel. Pride stops impersonating competence because pride cannot listen. What remains is a usable courage, a quiet readiness that accepts process without surrendering expectancy. This is not a mood, it is a moral climate in which the mind can conserve energy because it is no longer campaigning for control. The takeaway is experiential. Reverence reduces friction at the root, which shortens every road we must walk. Under God, prayer is not a speech, but a pledge. We speak instruction in the hearing of the highest, and then live as if the highest heard, which is why careless words are so expensive in this economy. The conserved life treats language as the first lever of causation, and the reverent life refuses to spend that lever on panic or performance. If Scripture may whisper once, "Be still," and "know," the order is clear. Stillness precedes knowledge because allegiance precedes instruction. The conclusion is operational. Worship tightens the seal on meaning so that the formula has a vessel it can actually fill. There is also a hard caution. When practice is cut loose from God, acceleration can still happen, but it becomes acceleration toward the wrong address, and wrong addresses punish us by success. The world calls it winning, conscience calls it waste. Under divine order, success is defined as faithful correspondence between inner instruction and outer fruit, and that definition rescues us from glittering mistakes. The takeaway is protective. Anchoring in God prevents speed from turning into drift with trophies. The forgotten principle depends on this anchoring. Conservation is not mere focus, it is focus under obedience. Many can concentrate for a time, few can consecrate for a life, and consecration makes the difference between a burst and a current. In consecration, desire is offered, not displayed. Images are tested, not indulged. Plans are submitted, not marketed. And the paradox is that surrender multiplies power because it ends the civil war inside intention. The conclusion is paradox resolved. Obedience looks slower at first, yet it is the shortest path because it removes resistance at the source. Consider the emotional architecture of trust. Trust is not naivete. It is the decision to let reality be structured by someone wiser than our mood. This decision releases us from the exhausting project of rewriting the universe to suit our deadlines. And with that release, delay stops scraping our nerves. A trusted schedule feels different from a guest schedule, and the heart can work longer with less fatigue when it believes the clock is kind. The takeaway is physiological as well as spiritual. Trust lowers the cost of time, which is why it looks like acceleration from the outside. If you press, how does this allegiance alter the mechanism? The answer is clean. Prayer under God becomes precise because we refuse to lie to the one we revere. Receptivity deepens because the subconscious bows to a higher court. Intuition clarifies because conscience is no longer negotiated with, but obeyed. The threefold movement word, receptivity, oracle, tightens into a single rope capable of bearing real weight. The conclusion is mechanical and devotional at once. Allegiance upgrades every link so that the chain can pull. To hold this line, we adopt a posture, humility with backbone. Humility without backbone leaks into passivity. Backbone without humility hardens into noise. Under God, we combine both. We are pliable in motive and precise in method, kind in tone and exact in aim, patient with timing and relentless with practice. This posture is not a personality trait. It is a chosen regimen that keeps energy from scattering into apology or aggression. The takeaway is posture as infrastructure. Your stance before the source is the scaffolding of your speed. Is it necessary to name God for the law to work? The law can be observed without naming the lawgiver, just as gravity can be used without worshiping gravity. Yet when stakes rise, when motives complicate, when delay lengthens, when power arrives, only reverence keeps the heart straight. Naming God keeps the axis clear, so that gifts do not outgrow guidance. The conclusion respects freedom while insisting on wisdom. You can ride momentum without worship, but you cannot steward it without worship. Practically, allegiance must appear on the calendar. Begin each day with a brief act of consecration that places the chief aim under God, not for superstition, but for alignment. Pause midday for a 5-minute stillness where you audit leaks and renew obedience. Close the evening by thanking for guidance received and returning what is unfinished to the source. These 3 moments create a trellis on which the vine of effort can climb without tangling itself. The takeaway is administrative. Schedule your reverence or your hurry will schedule you. Boundaries follow naturally. Under God, we cannot align with requests that counterfeit our instruction, even when they pay. We cannot endorse words that violate our prayer, even when they charm. We cannot rush in panic, even when crowds applaud. This restraint is not stiffness. It is economy. Every no returns fuel to the engine that must carry the yes, and that fuel will be needed when acceleration begins to test our integrity. The conclusion is ethical physics. Right refusals conserve thrust. Already the cadence is changing. Awe settles into steadiness, and steadiness warms into heat without recklessness. We stand under order, not over it. We practice under promise, not pressure. We move under guidance, not guesswork. Delay becomes a classroom rather than a courtroom, and acceleration a sacrament of right measure rather than a medal for desperation. With God named as the source, we can now recover the forgotten principle, the buried key that turns stored time into usable pace. What if the key you misplaced was not small, but simple? The forgotten principle that sat on your table so long you stopped seeing it, and yet it is the only key that turns delay into acceleration without strain. The contrast is sharp. We chase techniques as if novelty were power, but law answers to fidelity, and fidelity means returning to the principle we abandoned when hurry became our teacher. This section is a recovery mission, not a scavenger hunt. We are not collecting curiosities. We are restoring the missing gear that makes every other gear engage. Name the principle plainly: conservation of meaning under God. Desire is energy. Meaning is the vessel. Conservation is the seal. When meaning is sealed by clear allegiance, energy stops evaporating into contradiction and begins compounding into pace. This is why outcomes can appear to quicken without added frenzy. Less is lost between intention and action, so motion grows dense and continuous. The takeaway is definitional. The forgotten principle is not about doing more, it is about losing less. Because the principle was forgotten, we mistook delay for failure and tried to outrun it. That panic widened the leak. In truth, most delays are not denials. They are invoices for the energy we have allowed to spill through vague aims, mixed motives, and words that undo our prayers. When the seal is restored, the same hours become heavier with consequence, the same steps acquire coherence, and the same opportunities start to notice us, because our signal is finally strong. The point lands. Acceleration often begins where leakage ends. Emotional honesty is part of the seal. A consecrated intention cannot be half true. It cannot flatter the ego while asking heaven for simplicity. Under God, we tell the truth about what we want and why, and that truthfulness thickens the wall of the vessel like tempered glass. We are spared the fatigue of pretending piety while craving spectacle, and spared the chaos of craving control while naming it stewardship. The result is an interior quiet that does not deaden feeling but organizes it, so that feeling becomes fuel instead of smoke. The conclusion is moral. The seal is made of integrity. At this junction, the lineage matters not for authority games, but for clarity. Emmet Fox, speaking from the New Thought Stream, taught that forming the mental equivalent under prayerful alignment prepares a runway for events to land. One mention is enough because the force is in the law, not the signature. The phrase mental equivalent guards us from superstition. We are not wishing, We are building an inner pattern sturdy enough to host the thing we seek. The practical meaning is crisp. If you cannot picture it without self-contradiction, you cannot carry it without collapse. Mechanism now, without romance. Prayer is the clean instruction, the statement of what is to be, addressed under allegiance, stripped of complaint and bargaining. Subconscious receptivity receives that instruction and begins discarding contrary imagery. It edits the internal archive so the pattern is consistent. Then the silent oracle conscience-tuned intuition delivers hunches in time. Make that call. Decline that invitation. Revise that sentence. Rest now. When this chain is unbroken, time tightens. When it is broken, time frays. The operational rule is dependable. Keep the chain intact, and the calendar shortens without turning cruel. A single scriptural whisper is permitted to anchor the simplicity. Ask, and you shall receive. Ask here does not mean plead, it means specify under reverence. Receive does not mean passivity, it means build the inner equivalent without sabotage. The space between asking and receiving is where the seal is tested by habit, by memory, and by the fear that we are foolish to hold steady. The law is kind but exact. The more faithfully the inner is kept, the more swiftly the outer aligns. The takeaway is disciplined expectancy rather than drama. Because we forgot the principle, we also forgot measure. We tried intensity instead of integrity, volume instead of order, publicity instead of practice. The forgotten principle restores the salt metaphor. The right measure preserves, excess corrodes. In devotion, this means enough focus to heat the contents, but not so much effort that the vessel cracks. In work, this means enough visibility to serve the mission, but not so much exposure that the mission serves visibility. The conclusion is a craft lesson. Grace rides on proportion. Let the heart feel the turn this makes in common life. In a strained relationship, the old way presses for immediate resolution and calls delay, proof of hopelessness. The principle seals meaning first. What is the faithful aim here? And then allows time to clarify so a conversation arrives warmer, shorter, and truer. In finances, the old way chases opportunities that do not match our pattern and calls speed smart. The principle trims the aim and only accepts paths that do not hemorrhage integrity, so resources snowball quietly. In health of mind, the old way vows sweeping change and burns out by Thursday. The principle consecrates a daily act that the conscience can bless, and acceleration shows up as steadiness that others can see. The practical takeaway is repeatable. When the seal holds, delays shrink to the size of learning, not punishment. A caution belongs here. The principle is not nostalgia for easier times, it is the architecture that makes any time workable. If we romanticize the past, we insult the law. If we idolize the future, we weaken the present where conservation happens. The point is to remain current with obedience, to confess yesterday's leaks without shame, and to protect today's seal without theatrics. This unglamorous fidelity is why acceleration looks like gift. The harvest of quiet correctness often feels like generosity from beyond, and in a sense it is. The law pays in peace before it pays in pace. 2 implementation handles prevent drift. First, the vow of exact word. State your chief intention each morning in 12 honest words or fewer, under God, with no hedging and no apology, and keep that sentence as your day's tuning fork. Second, the audit of images. 3 times daily, surface competing pictures by name and release them, then rehearse the mental equivalent for 30 slow seconds, letting conscience confirm its rightness. These micro-acts are not dramatic, they are efficient, and efficiency is the outward face of conservation. The result is a day that feels narrower but proves faster. You may protest, but I tried clarity and nothing moved, Was the principle missing? Often it was the seal. We spoke cleanly at dawn and leaked by noon through resentment, comparison, or the exhaustion of self-display. The correction is merciful. Reduce outputs that do not serve the consecrated aim. Prune conversations that confuse your interior. Refuse content that trains envy. End the daily theater that steals rehearsal time from obedience. None of this is glamorous. All of it is freeing. The law rewards what it can trust, and trust grows where signal to noise improves. By the end of recovery, a different emotion surfaces. Relief. Relief that the world is not random, that delay is not a moral indictment, and that speed does not require panic. Relief matures quickly into accountability, because the moment we know the seal is the difference, we know why shortcuts feel wrong in the bones. Accountability is not a scold. It is a privilege proof that our choices count and our practice matters. The conclusion is empowering. The forgotten principle restores agency without arrogance. So the recovery of the forgotten principle is not the end, but the turning point. With the seal restored and meaning conserved, we can now face delay itself with new eyes, not as an obstacle to resent, but as a reservoir of potential held in trust, waiting to be released in the right measure. What once pressed on us like a wall may prove to be stored momentum, and the next step is to learn how to draw from that hidden store without fear. Delay has always carried a sting like a heavy silence after an earnest prayer, or a door that refuses to open, even though you have knocked faithfully. Yet, under the light of the secret formula, we begin to see delay differently, not as abandonment, not as failure, but as energy conserved, waiting for the right alignment to release its strength. What once seemed like wasted months or years can be reinterpreted as a reservoir of potential, sealed until the vessel of meaning is ready to hold it. The emotional turn here is vital. Grief becomes expectancy, and frustration becomes the pressure that proves something valuable is being stored. To call delay stored potential is not to romanticize stagnation. It is to respect the laws of conservation that govern both matter and spirit. In physics, energy never disappears, it changes form. In the inner life, intention never evaporates. It either leaks through contradiction or accumulates under order. When it leaks, time feels hostile. When it accumulates, time feels pregnant. The takeaway is stark. Delay is a thermometer of integrity, showing us whether our desire is conserved or squandered. Emotionally, this recognition lifts a weight. Many who struggle under long delays begin to feel condemned, as if their faith were too weak or their words unheard. Yet the law tells a different story. Delay is not divine disfavor, but the bill of leakage. Bills are not curses, they are information, and information is mercy, because it shows us what must be sealed before we can carry what we asked for. The conclusion is freeing. The pain of delay need not be humiliation, it can be instruction. Prayer reframes delay at its root. When we speak a consecrated word under God, that word creates a time-sealed chamber. Within that chamber, the subconscious begins to construct the mental equivalent, a structure that can carry the weight of the requested outcome. The apparent slowness is the work of building. If the structure is weak, acceleration would destroy it. If the structure is strong, acceleration becomes blessing, not burden. The lesson is practical. Delay is scaffolding. Acceleration is the unveiling of what scaffolding has supported. The silent oracle is most active in delay. When nothing seems to move, conscience whispers adjustments that shorten detours later. Let go of this grudge, sharpen that skill, decline that compromise, rest when pride would overwork. To ignore these hunches is to extend delay indefinitely, because no acceleration can outpace a sabotage we refuse to correct. To heed them is to discover that each correction shortens the calendar invisibly. The practical meaning is precise. Delay is the classroom where the oracle tutors us, and only when the lessons are absorbed can speed arrive safely. A single scriptural echo may illustrate the paradox. In due season we shall reap if we do not faint. Due season is not procrastination, it is calibrated ripeness. Farmers do not accuse the soil when they cannot harvest in April what belongs to August. Neither should the soul accuse heaven when its seed is still forming roots. The principle is protective. The law waits until roots can bear fruit, because premature acceleration is collapse disguised as victory. Think of a bow pulled back and held. The archer does not doubt the arrow because it rests. The rest is the storage of force. Delay is the bowstring drawn taut, conserving energy until the aim is aligned. The release is sudden only because the tension was silent, and so it is with our lives. Years that looked empty become the very reservoir that makes a moment decisive. The image lands in instruction. Treat delay as stored thrust. Hold your aim steady, and the release will not miss. Practically, reinterpreting delay means changing our posture while waiting. Instead of rehearsing grievances, we rehearse gratitude for conservation. Instead of multiplying tasks to distract from silence, we deepen stillness to conserve clarity. Instead of resenting others' speed, we refine our vessel so acceleration does not destroy us when it comes. This posture does not shrink time, it redeems it. And redemption is a more lasting gift than rescue. The practical takeaway is robust. Cultivate gratitude, stillness, and vessel care in delay, and you transform it into acceleration's hidden ally. Caution is essential here. Not every delay is storage. Some delays are drift. The difference lies in alignment. If your word under God is exact, if your vessel is being tended, if the oracle is being obeyed, then the delay is gestation. But if your word is vague, your vessel cracked, and your oracle ignored, then delay is erosion. The law is merciful, but impartial. This is why consecration must come before interpretation. Otherwise, we excuse laziness by calling it waiting. The conclusion is corrective. Distinguish gestation from drift by the presence or absence of order. The emotional release at this stage is deep relief. We realize delay has not stolen our lives. It has preserved our energy until we are ready. We discover that what seemed like a wall was a reservoir, and what seemed like wasted years were a bowstring being pulled back. This relief is not sentimental, it is strategic, because it gives us courage to stay faithful when acceleration is still unseen. And courage itself shortens the path, because courage prevents fainting, and those who do not faint reap. So the lens shifts. Delay is no longer the enemy. It is the rehearsal space where strength is gathered. With this reinterpretation alive in us, the next step is to discover how prayer, the ignition of acceleration, turns stored potential into forward thrust with precise intention. Strike a match in a still room. The flame does not argue with the dark, it instructs it, and that is prayer under God, the ignition that converts conserved potential into directed thrust. Prayer here is not pleading for exceptions, it is issuing lawful instruction from a consecrated center so that time, motive, and action align. The thesis is exact. When prayer becomes precise intention under allegiance, delay stops dissipating and begins accelerating. The takeaway is definitional. Prayer is ignition, not performance. We must separate prayer from its counterfeits. Performance prayer courts attention. Bargaining prayer trades panic for promises. Vague prayer names clouds and expects architecture. True prayer gives a clean command in the hearing of the highest, then lives as if heard. This is covenantal speech, where words are chosen for work rather than for mood. The conclusion is corrective. The economy of law spends only words that can carry weight. Because prayer is ignition, language matters at the level of engineering. A sloppy command wastes fuel. A divided command fights itself. Therefore, we train our wording to be specific, affirmative, and simple. We name the good we are building, not the chaos we fear. We define the form without strangling the method. We keep to 12 honest words or fewer, so the mind can carry the torch all day. The practical rule is sharp. Brevity disciplines desire, specificity conserves momentum. Under God, the heart of prayer is consecration, not control. We do not coerce reality, we align with the living order and let alignment pull reality into shape. This posture prevents our instruction from becoming manipulation and our expectancy from becoming entitlement. Consecration purifies motive so that energy stops arguing with itself, and purified energy moves like a single river rather than a swollen floodplain. The takeaway is moral physics. The cleanest motive makes the straightest path. Prayer ignites. Subconscious receptivity sustains the burn. Once the word is spoken, the inner chamber must be kept at pressure. We do this by releasing contrary images on sight and rehearsing the mental equivalent without strain, letting conscience confirm its rightness. The rhythm is gentle but relentless. Instruction in the morning, receptivity through the day, correction as needed. The operational insight is dependable. Ignition fails without oxygen, and in the soul, oxygen is trustful repetition. What of emotion? Precision does not cancel feeling, it organizes it. Joy becomes fuel, fear becomes a signal, grief becomes depth, excitement becomes a helper rather than a driver. The prayerful life is not colorless, it is coherent, and coherence multiplies the thrust of every color it permits. The conclusion is pastoral yet exact. Ordered feeling accelerates, unordered feeling digresses. A single scriptural echo may stand as blueprint rather than ornament. Let there be light. The pattern is undeniable. Word first, form follows, function emerges. Prayer follows this architecture. Word under God calls structure out of the formless. Then the structure bears fruit at speed. We do not shout the light into being, we instruct it. The takeaway is elemental. Speak to shape, not to noise. To prevent drift, we submit the daily command to 3 tests. First, the truth test. Can I say this without flattery or self-deception? Second, the alignment test. Would this command survive the gaze of the source I claim to serve? Third, the stewardship test. Can I act on this today in one faithful step? If the command fails any test, we refine it. If it passes, we seal it and proceed. The practical aim is integrity. Commands that cannot be walked cannot be worked by law. Because prayer ignites, it shortens the calendar in hidden ways. The precise word cancels detours by forbidding contradictory obligations. It reveals false opportunities by exposing their mismatch with the command. It attracts fit allies because clarity speaks a dialect that clarity recognizes. What looks like speed is often subtraction, fewer sidesteps, fewer repairs, fewer apologies. The conclusion is strategic. Acceleration is frequently the removal of what never belonged. Consider an example in work. The vague command, I want success, pulls like a fog, and fog produces circles. The precise command, under God, I deliver one finished chapter by Friday at 3 p.m., tightens effort into a measurable corridor. Receptivity keeps the corridor clear. Intuition flags the hour to draft, the meeting to decline, the sentence to cut. Friday arrives with a product instead of a drama. The practical takeaway is transferable. Every domain obeys the same ignition. Delay often masquerades as endurance when prayer is imprecise. We call it patience to soothe the fact that we never issued a command strong enough to organize a week. Real patience is not vacancy. It is a loaded pause after a clean instruction, and loaded pauses detonate as guidance at the right hour. The correction is bracing. Pray cleanly, then wait like a pilot at takeoff, not a passenger at a bus stop. There is a danger unique to the zealous, overpraying the same command to manage anxiety. Repetition is useful when it renews consent. It is wasteful when it auditions for control. Once a command is sealed, we keep it by obedience, not by volume. We can whisper it to stay aligned, but the real proof is that our calendar now speaks the same sentence. The takeaway is economy. Do not spend words where deeds are owed. The silent oracle intuition informed by conscience speaks most clearly after ignition. The command clarifies the bandwidth. Now hunches arrive with timestamps. Send that email at 9:10, walk outdoors before the call, give the credit there, apologize here, rest now. None of this is theatrical, yet each instruction removes friction that used to burn hours. To ignore such nudges is to sabotage our own acceleration. To obey them is to discover that time itself feels wiser. The conclusion is navigational. Prayer provides direction. The oracle provides timing. Does prayer guarantee outcomes? No. Law guarantees correspondence. If our inner architecture matches the command, and our steps respect the timing we are given, outcomes converge with increasing reliability. If our architecture is cracked, or our timing rebellious, we will still occasionally land wins, but they will punish us by success, because our vessel cannot hold what arrived. The sober lesson is safety first. The best victories are those we can carry. We seal this section with handles. Morning. One exact command under God for the day's chief aim, written where your eyes must meet it. Midday. A 3-minute audit. Which images have leaked? Release them. What is the mental equivalent? Rehearse it. What is the next right step? Write it and move. Evening. Return the day to the source, confess leaks without drama, and thank for guidance received. These acts are small, their compounding is not. The practical promise is modest and real. A week of honest commands is faster than a month of inspired confusion. Feel the emotional curve now. Clean words lift the chest. Steady obedience calms the jaw. Early wins restore humor. The day stops feeling like a fight and starts feeling like flight. That sensation is not hype. It is the physics of conservation meeting ignition. And because life is not a lab, the next terrain will still include resistance, criticism, setbacks, friction we did not plan for. What then? Here the story turns towards strength. The very law that ignites acceleration also teaches us to read resistance as raw material. Under order, friction is not a brake, but a vector. Opposition is not a verdict, but a wind that can fill the sails when we trim them correctly. Having learned to pray as ignition, we are ready to transmute that friction into thrust. Resistance is unavoidable. Even the cleanest prayer and the most faithful vessel meet winds, critics, setbacks, and friction. Yet under the secret formula of God, resistance is not a brake. It is fuel that can be transmuted into thrust when read under law instead of under fear. The thesis here is sharp. What feels like friction can become acceleration's ally if interpreted and disciplined correctly. The takeaway is liberating. Opposition is not always the enemy. Misinterpretation is. Think of a ship meeting headwind. If the sails are trimmed rightly, the very gust that seems to block becomes the force that propels. So it is with the soul. Criticism sharpens motive, setbacks prune excess, delays concentrate desire. Without law, these irritants scatter us. Under law, they are absorbed, redirected, and multiplied. The emotional turn is real. Despair converts into courage, complaint into strategy, bruises into ballast. The conclusion is emphatic. Nothing wasted when meaning is sealed. Prayer anchors this conversion. A consecrated command under God gives resistance a frame. Without the command, criticism stings like chaos. With the command, it tests fidelity. Without the command, delay insults. With the command, it measures incubation. The simple sentence carried from prayer into the day acts like a filter, sorting noise from guidance. Thus, the very event that would have paralyzed now refines. The operational insight is plain. Prayer defines which frictions are relevant, and relevance makes them usable. The subconscious participates as well. Left untended, it treats resistance as proof of futility, echoing old memories of failure. Under receptivity, it is trained to treat resistance as proof of progress, the pressure that only appears once the vessel is real. This reframing edits our archive, so each new bump reinforces trust instead of undermining it. The practical meaning is clean. The subconscious becomes an engine of perseverance when conservation is taught. The silent oracle whispers clearest in resistance. Conscience speaks at the exact pinch point. Speak softer here, withdraw there, push harder now, let go tomorrow. These hunches arrive not to remove resistance, but to shape it into forward motion. Ignoring them leads to burnout. Obeying them creates unexpected shortcuts. We discover, often to surprise, that the critique we feared actually closes a false path, saving us months. The conclusion is directional. Intuition trims the sail, turning wind into thrust. Emotionally, the curve shifts from pain to discovery. At first, resistance feels like insult. Then, under the formula, it reveals itself as pressure stored on our behalf. The paradox deepens courage. We stop praying for friction to vanish and start asking how to use it. This does not glorify suffering, it redeems it. Redemption is the law's habit. Nothing is wasted except what we refuse to consecrate. A scriptural whisper fits here: all things work together for good. The phrase is not sentimental, it is structural. All things includes friction. Under God, resistance collaborates with acceleration rather than contradicts it. The difference lies not in events, but in interpretation. The takeaway is stern but hopeful. The same wind that sinks one vessel speeds another, depending on trim. Practically, transmuting resistance involves 3 daily practices. First, the critique test. Every criticism received is written down and sifted. Does it expose a leak in my vessel? If yes, correct. If no, release. Second, the setback ledger. Every delay is logged with the question, what capacity is being stored? Third, the push-pull discernment. Each resistance is prayed over for direction. Is this to lean in or to step aside? These small disciplines prevent wasted energy and return friction as forward motion. Caution belongs here. Not all resistance is meaningful. Some is noise with no covenantal relevance. Without discernment, we will dignify every pushback as divine, and fanaticism follows. The safeguard is measure. If the resistance aligns with the consecrated command, treat it as training. If it contradicts the command's integrity, dismiss it as distraction. The conclusion is protective. Not every wind is worth a sail. Notice the emotional gain. The soul that once dreaded setbacks begins to greet them as indicators of proximity. We know we are near the harbor when the currents grow strongest. Instead of despairing, we interpret, adapt, and conserve, and the very struggle becomes evidence of acceleration's nearness. That confidence shortens fatigue because energy spent with purpose costs less. The point is physiological as much as spiritual, meaning economizes stamina. Thus, the arc is clear. Resistance is not a sign to abandon the formula. It is the terrain where the formula proves itself. Where others scatter, the consecrated conserve. Where others stall, the consecrated redirect. What once felt like an endless break becomes the very push that carries us faster. And so, the path widens. Having learned to transmute friction into thrust, we are now ready to order our daily life more deliberately. Affirmation, attention, and the discipline of order will be the architecture that conserves every spark and compounds it into lasting acceleration. There is a moment after ignition and after resistance when life asks not for another burst, but for order, the quiet architecture that channels energy so it compounds instead of scattering. This is where affirmation, attention, and daily order become the scaffolding of acceleration. The thesis is steady. Acceleration is not only born of fire, it is sustained by structure. The point is practical. Without order, the thrust gained in prayer and resistance leaks away. With order, every spark is preserved and multiplied. Affirmation comes first, not slogans repeated mindlessly, but words of covenant that reinforce the consecrated command. Each morning we affirm not to impress ourselves, but to anchor attention in the line already given. These words work like stakes in the ground. They hold the tent steady when the winds shift. Repeated rightly, affirmations are not attempts to force belief. They are reminders that prevent leaks. The operational rule is simple. Affirmation is conservation of word. Attention follows. Where the gaze rests, energy flows. A distracted eye wastes hours. A disciplined gaze converts the same hours into steps forward. Attention must be trained like a lens, focused on the appointed aim, wide enough to notice the oracle's cues, narrow enough to ignore the circus. We cultivate attention not by violence, but by ritual, choosing when to look, when to close, when to rest. The conclusion is behavioral. Attention, left wild, multiplies delay. Attention, disciplined, multiplies speed. Order then gathers affirmation and attention into a calendar. A consecrated schedule is not bondage, it is economy. Each hour placed in right sequence becomes a sealed vessel. Without order, even good intentions bleed. With order, even modest resources grow weighty. Think of a river channeled into canals. It irrigates fields instead of flooding valleys. The takeaway is organizational. Acceleration is structure wearing the face of time. The subconscious thrives in ordered environments. It learns patterns by repetition. When affirmations are consistent and attention disciplined, the subconscious edits itself automatically, pruning contradictions and reinforcing the vessel. Disorder, by contrast, teaches the subconscious that chaos is normal and chaos cannot conserve. The practical meaning is straightforward. A consistent order trains the unseen mind to become a collaborator instead of a saboteur. Intuition, too, depends on order. The silent oracle is most audible when the noise is patterned, not random. By keeping a daily rhythm, we create quiet pockets where guidance is more distinct. A hunch during morning silence, a nudge while closing the day. Random lives hear oracles as static. Ordered lives hear them as sentences. The conclusion is navigational. Order is the language in which intuition speaks clearly. Emotionally, order brings relief. The restless fear that time is slipping through our hands subsides when every hour has a place. Even setbacks sting less because they interrupt a structure that can absorb shocks. Anxiety fades not because life is simpler, but because life is framed. That frame gives courage to continue, and courage shortens the road. The takeaway is existential. Order is mercy to the nerves. A scriptural echo may seal the point. Let all things be done decently and in order. The phrase is not a bureaucratic command, but a conserving one. Decency prevents waste of motive. Order prevents waste of time. Together they transmute the raw thrust of spirit into sustainable momentum. The point is timeless. Acceleration without order is a crash in waiting. Practical handles matter here. Begin each day by writing the consecrated command at the top of your planner. Align 3 core tasks with it. Refuse tasks that do not serve it. Use a short affirmation each time attention wanders, not as magic but as a reset. This is my command under God. Nothing else deserves my energy today. Close the evening by reviewing. Where did attention serve? Where did it leak? This loop of morning command, daytime reset, evening review is not glamorous, but compounding. The practical promise is sound. Ordered repetition accelerates more than inspired improvisation. Caution must be spoken. Order can be distorted into rigidity, choking the very life it means to conserve. We must hold to measure, enough structure to seal, enough flexibility to breathe. A sealed vessel must still have air. A consecrated schedule must still allow for surprise. The oracle often speaks through interruptions. The wise schedule listens without collapsing. The conclusion is balanced. Order serves acceleration best when it is both firm and porous. The emotional curve at this stage is peace. No longer tossed by delay, no longer drained by resistance, the soul discovers calm productivity. Life stops feeling random. Days acquire shape. Weeks begin to tell stories. The movement is forward, but without frenzy. And yet, acceleration that is purely personal can still falter if relationships lag. To preserve momentum in full, the law must be applied to the agreements, boundaries, and service that govern life with others. There comes a point when acceleration itself becomes a test. Energy surges, opportunities multiply, momentum builds. But without discipline, speed collapses into drift. The covenant of discipline is the safeguard. It binds the gains of prayer, receptivity, and order so that the current does not turn into a flood. The thesis here is clear. Acceleration must be governed, or it will consume its own promise. The takeaway is practical. Discipline is not a chain. It is the track that keeps the train from burning itself out. Discipline in this sense is not punishment. It is covenant and agreement with God that our power will be exercised in measure. Without it, we mistake zeal for law. With it, we discover the paradox that restraint multiplies pace. A bowed branch carries more fruit than a wild one, not less. The emotional pivot is maturity, enthusiasm tempered into steadiness, hunger shaped into stewardship. The conclusion is exact. Discipline preserves what inspiration begins. Prayer under discipline acquires new weight. Words are not only exact, but scheduled. The consecrated command is not shouted when panic rises, but spoken faithfully at set times. Repetition becomes loyalty, not compulsion. In this rhythm, prayer ceases to be crisis management and matures into covenant practice. The lesson is mechanical. Discipline turns isolated sparks into a steady flame. The subconscious thrives under discipline. Just as it learns chaos when routines scatter, it learns fidelity when practices hold. A vessel sealed daily becomes a habit the subconscious defends. Instead of leaking through distraction, the mind begins to correct itself, nudging back to the command, pruning contradictions, rehearsing the mental equivalent automatically. The takeaway is neurological. Discipline reprograms the inner economy. The silent oracle also honors discipline. Intuition speaks more reliably when we show up consistently. Sporadic listening yields sporadic hunches. Daily stillness yields daily guidance. This is not mysticism, but relationship. Discipline proves seriousness, and seriousness sharpens reception. The practical meaning is plain. A covenantal schedule makes divine timing audible. Emotionally, discipline stabilizes the highs and lows of acceleration. Without it, we lurch between euphoria and exhaustion, praising progress one week and cursing delay the next. With it, we discover a steady hum and underlying peace that carries through both applause and critique. This steadiness is acceleration's true power, not a sprint, but a current that endures. The conclusion is existential. Discipline lengthens speed into durability. A scriptural whisper fits here. He that is faithful in little is faithful also in much. The phrase is the essence of discipline. Faithfulness in the small hours, the unnoticed routines, the quiet corrections, these accumulate into credibility with the law itself. The law rewards constancy because constancy reduces leaks. The point is undeniable. Small fidelity is the currency of large acceleration. Practically, the covenant of discipline requires 3 anchors. First, time discipline. Rise, pray, consecrate at the same hours daily, so the vessel is reinforced like a wall rebuilt each morning. Second, word discipline. Refuse speech that contradicts the command, whether in complaint, gossip, or self-mockery. Third, relational discipline. Protect boundaries with people and tasks that drain consecrated energy. These are not glamorous, but they conserve fuel. The operational promise is real. A disciplined vessel travels farther on less oil. Caution is vital. Discipline can harden into fanaticism if divorced from measure. Too much rigidity suffocates the oracle. Too little order invites chaos. The salt metaphor returns. Right measure preserves. Excess corrupts. Discipline is covenant, not cruelty. It protects energy without strangling life. The conclusion is balanced. True discipline breathes even as it binds. Feel the emotional gain now. Where once we feared rules as prisons, we see them as scaffolds. Where once delay humiliated, we now understand its purpose. Where once acceleration frightened us, we now can hold it. This steadiness sets the stage for a new dimension, the interpersonal. For acceleration to remain whole, it must extend beyond private practice into shared agreements, so that relationships cease to stall us and begin to multiply our momentum. Momentum does not exist in isolation. Even the strongest vessel, the clearest command, the steadiest discipline will slow if relationships remain disordered. Acceleration multiplies when agreements, boundaries, and service align with divine order. The thesis here is sober. Relationships are either accelerators or anchors. The takeaway is practical. Covenant extends beyond the private soul into every bond we maintain. Interpersonal life is the proving ground of conservation. Words spoken in prayer lose power if undone in conversation. Energy gathered in stillness leaks through toxic agreements or neglected boundaries. Service offered without measure drains what was meant to be multiplied. To seal our vessel fully, we must bring relationships under the same law that governs prayer and practice. The point is comprehensive. No compartment is exempt. Prayer redefines relationships as covenant. When we consecrate our connections under God, we cease using them as instruments of ego. Affection becomes service. Disagreement becomes refinement. Boundaries become mercy. Under this lens, delay in relationships is not failure, but preparation. Acceleration is not conquest, but collaboration. The operational truth is strong. Relationships conserved by reverence become channels of speed. Subconscious receptivity adapts accordingly. The inner life carries hidden narratives about others, resentments, comparisons, fears that sabotage acceleration. When consecrated under God, the subconscious edits these scripts, building a mental equivalent of clean, balanced bonds. Instead of expecting betrayal, it rehearses trust. Instead of fearing abandonment, it envisions covenant. This reframing conserves energy once wasted on suspicion. The takeaway is psychological. Healed expectation shortens relational delay. The silent oracle speaks decisively here. Intuition warns us when a bond is draining fuel, nudges us to set boundaries, or prompts us to invest in the partnership that multiplies momentum. The still small voice distinguishes between resistance that trains and resistance that corrodes. To obey is to accelerate. To ignore is to stall. The lesson is navigational. Guidance about people is part of guidance about pace. Emotionally, the curve is tender. We feel relief in letting go of ties that no longer align, courage in saying no without hostility, joy in discovering allies whose speed doubles ours. Relationships stop being arenas of drama and start becoming engines of thrust. The conclusion is relational. Acceleration is communal when law governs affection. A scriptural whisper may seal this: two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. The phrase is not sentiment but structure. Under God, shared labor multiplies return. Solitary striving wastes fuel. The law honors synergy because conservation thrives where energies are joined, not drained. Practical handles confirm this. First, the covenantal boundary. Define in prayer what your relationships must honor and enforce it calmly. Second, the spoken alignment. Use affirmations not only privately, but in dialogue, speaking words that match your command rather than contradict it. Third, the service measure. Give without leaking, serve without self-erasure, and decline when giving would fracture the vessel. These practices turn relationships into multipliers instead of thieves. Caution is essential. Not every bond can be kept, and not every separation is cruelty. The measure remains. Does this tie conserve or leak? Does this agreement multiply or scatter? Without discipline, loyalty becomes idolatry, and the law does not reward idolatry. With courage, loyalty becomes covenant, and the law accelerates covenant. The conclusion is balanced. Discernment, not sentiment, governs holy bonds. Feel the emotional turn. Where once others slowed us with confusion, now they sharpen us with clarity. Where once community was distraction, now it is multiplication. Where once we feared rejection, now we discern alignment. Momentum stops being solitary strain and becomes shared current. And with relational acceleration secured, we are prepared for the final turn, consecrated action itself, the art of moving in pace with God, neither rushing ahead nor lagging behind, so outcomes ripen under incorruptible order. Acceleration is not a sprint that leaves us breathless. It is the mature pace of consecrated action, aligned with the rhythm of God. Every element we have uncovered, prayer, receptivity, oracle, order, discipline, relationship, has prepared us for this point, to move without rush, without drift, at the precise timing of divine order. The thesis is plain. Consecrated action is the visible flowering of conserved energy. The takeaway is decisive. Speed without consecration is collapse. Speed under consecration is fulfillment. To act consecratedly is to carry the vessel into motion without spilling. Each task becomes more than labor. It is participation in divine order. We do not chase opportunity like fugitives. We walk into it like heirs. The subconscious, trained by seals and affirmations, no longer sabotages with fear. It collaborates by producing confidence at the hour of execution. The oracle confirms the timing, not tomorrow, not yesterday, but now. The conclusion is rhythmic. Consecrated action is obedience in motion. Emotionally, this is the place where rest and urgency meet. We feel no panic because the pace is not ours alone. We feel no lethargy because the law is already moving. The paradox is rich. Calm action is faster than frantic motion. The takeaway is experiential. When aligned, even small steps advance more than large flurries taken in haste. A scriptural whisper may affirm this cadence. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. The image is not of weary walkers dragging toward a finish line, but of steady flight carried by currents unseen. Action consecrated is not grounded in frantic effort, but lifted by order. The instruction is implicit. Strength is renewed when action flows from allegiance, not from anxiety. Practically, consecrated action means 3 habits. First, begin each day's work by stating not only the aim, but the pace. Under God, I move steadily through these 3 tasks today. Second, respect the closing of the day. No frantic extending, no needless striving. Closure seals conservation. Third, review action weekly with conscience, asking, was this motion aligned or vain? This triad transforms a calendar into an altar, each act an offering, not a gamble. Caution belongs here. To confuse consecrated pace with laziness is error. To confuse it with haste is folly. The salt metaphor returns yet again. Right measure is speed that breathes. Too fast, and the vessel cracks under pressure. Too slow, and momentum evaporates. The conclusion is balanced. The law rewards the pace that corresponds with ripeness, not with impulse. The emotional curve reaches its summit. Delay is no longer humiliation, but conservation. Resistance is no longer insult, but thrust. Order is no longer burden, but framework. Now action itself is consecrated, and outcomes ripen on time, not early to tempt pride, not late to torment despair, but in incorruptible sequence. This is peace in motion, to know we are neither dragging nor sprinting, but keeping covenant with God in every step. And as the arc closes, acceleration is no longer a mystery. It is the natural fruit of conservation, reverence, discipline, relationship, and action aligned. What once seemed like a secret formula has revealed itself as eternal law forgotten by us, but never absent from the source. Our journey ends not in spectacle, but in steady strength, consecrated action, paced by God, swift without hurry, certain without strain. We have traced the arc of the secret formula of God from the hidden law to its visible fruits. What began as mystery has revealed itself as covenant, a conserving principle that gathers scattered energy, seals it under divine allegiance, and releases it as acceleration in due season. Each stage prayer, receptivity, oracle, resistance, order, discipline, relationship, and consecrated action was not an isolated step, but a movement in one symphony. Delay, once feared, has been recast as stored potential. Resistance, once dreaded, has been revealed as thrust in disguise. Order, once resented, has become shelter. Discipline, once mistaken for severity, has proven to be covenantal strength. Relationship, once chaotic, has become multiplier, and action, once frantic, has matured into pace steady, incorruptible, serene. The pattern is no longer forgotten. It is lived. The emotional current of this journey matters as much as its logic. We began with awe, passed through steadiness, tasted relief, endured resistance, discovered peace, and arrived at a rhythm of fulfillment. This rhythm is the real acceleration, not the nervous haste of fear, but the assured momentum of law working through a consecrated life. As we close, one truth resounds. The secret formula was never hidden from God. It was hidden in us, beneath panic, contradiction, and forgetfulness. To recover it is to recover ourselves, our covenant, our order, our strength. When remembered, it restores both swiftness and serenity. To walk in this formula is to know that time is no longer wasted, but redeemed. So let your days unfold as sealed vessels, your words as clean commands, your relationships as covenantal ties, and your actions as consecrated offerings. Then acceleration will cease to be a dream or a drama. It will be the natural pace of a life aligned with the incorruptible source.